Do you remember those kids that whenever you talked about Frankenstein, they'd be like, well, actually, Frankenstein was the doctor and not the monster? I'm here to tell you today that those kids were absolutely wrong. My name is Amaris Bianchi, and I'm doing my novel project on Mary Shelley's 1818 Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. To summarize the plot of this tale, we actually start nearer towards the end of Frankenstein's journey. The book begins with four letters from a man named Captain Robert Walton that he writes to his sister. He's on a journey up north towards the Arctic with his crew, hoping to make scientific discoveries when they come across an 8-foot man traveling on a dog sled, chased by another man of normal height, but he looks to be very ill and possibly dying. They find the man and they bring him onto the ship and nurse him back to health. He reveals that his name is Victor Frankenstein, and for saving his life decides to tell them the story of how he came to the Arctic in the first place. Victor Frankenstein was raised in a loving home with very kind and involved parents who cared deeply about him. He had three younger brothers that he adored, and he had a cousin named Elizabeth, who his father adopted from his deceased sister and decides to raise as his own. He also had a best friend, Henry Clerval, who was like a brother to him, someone he cared about deeply. Despite this loving home of joy, he grew up and began to pursue science, go off to a prestigious school, isolate himself to gain more knowledge, and he committed the ultimate sin: dropping out of college. I'm kidding. He collects the remains of human body parts. He sews them back together, and through the use of the science that he's learned while being at school, he somehow brings a creature back from the dead. Pretty average Wednesday. He was so disgusted with his creature that he decided to run off and abandon him. This action has quite a few consequences throughout the book. To be blunt, Frankenstein goes down a path of spiraling depression, guilt, constantly avoiding responsibility, all that jazz. His creation, though, on the other hand, after escaping, he began to learn. He learned how to speak French and English. He learned about humanity. He learned how to commit multiple murders. Out of context, that probably sounds very odd, but it has much relevance to the conflict and character arcs. The story mainly revolves around two themes: the dangers of the pursuit of knowledge and how alienation affects the mind and the choices we as people make. Victor's pursuit of reanimation and bringing a creature back to life is what led to his demise, and it somewhat parallels the letters at the beginning of the book involving his journey and brings up the question of if it is truly worth losing your life or others close to you in the name of discovery and science. Mary Shelley also goes into great detail about Victor's early life and how he had a full home of love, compassion, and overall happiness, but after leaving that life behind, he commits a literal crime against nature, and Shelley even explicitly states that he felt sick constantly. He was ill, and at the mere memory of his creation felt weak. He goes through multiple ups and downs, and at some point he even considered ending his life. His creature, on the other hand, knew nothing but solitude for his days. From the moment Frankenstein abandoned him and then on, he was constantly alone. But he learned. He learned by listening and watching other people, even in his own isolation, and began to develop a moral sense in some way and wanted a family. He wanted what Victor gave up. Sadly, regardless of how each of their lives began, whether in a happy home or all alone, isolation and knowledge slowly corrupted them and led to the main conflicts of the book. Earlier, I said that if you were that kid that said Frankenstein was the doctor and not the monster, you were both correct, but also incorrect in a way. One could consider the creature as a Frankenstein, given that Victor Frankenstein created the monster, gave him life. In a way, that was his father. In another aspect, Victor's actions of meddling with the laws of nature, his abandonment of his creation, his irresponsibility, it caused irreparable damage to him and the people he cares about later on in the book. It's almost cruel and monstrous itself to some extent, the things that he does. Also, Victor Frankenstein was never a doctor. He was a depressed college dropout who played God. In all seriousness, Shelley's use of Victor and his creature's flaws and decisions bring up multiple questions of morality, causation and effect, and what it truly means to be human.